Cool. We're live. So Satira, just for context, if I'm particularly stupid on this call, it's because I just flew from Hong Kong to Belgium, so I've barely had any sleep in the past 24 hours. And
Yep.
then I was telling Thomas, so I literally landed, and then 45 minutes later, I was moderating an AMA on Discord and Twitter. And so my mother came to pick me up. She was like, "Oh, actually, there are tractors. There's like a strike for the farmers and so on. So I don't know how
Yes.
long it's gonna take to get." So I'm like, "Sure, yeah, right now. Okay, let's just go one step at a time." And then I literally just arrived, opened my laptop, did the thing, and then I had maybe 10-minute pause, and then I'm doing this call, and then
Wow. Okay.
okay, the call. Anyway, intense morning for me here.
Yeah, just like crypto, the market's never sleep.
True. By the way, I feel like everybody's a bit sick these days. Not
I
you,
know.
but I think for Hong Kong, everybody's is
Yeah. Well, I just got back from a wedding in Korea and it killed me. So uh, all good now, though.
um I have not prepared anything. I don't know how you guys want to kick it off.
Markets,
Uh
Bitcoin.
I want to go straight into degen. I feel like my brain is ripe for degenning right into things. Um how do we feel about markets? Like let's go with the dumbest question I could ask, but are we feeling bullish? Are we feeling bearish? Are we feeling muted like a sideways market? Like how are you thinking about it?
I'm so fucking bearish. I feel it should be bullish.
Mm,
I've also reached the point. I'm not sure where it is on the Ghana hype cycle, but just of like, I've just been so checked out this last week on the market. So I'm just like, I'm at this point where whatever happens, happens type thing.
yeah.
I'm just completely given up, which I think is normally what happens fairly close to a bottom. So um,
I
my
couldn't
my
agree.
indifference is trying to put
Couldn't
in.
agree more with you. I'm totally not feeling that same level of pessimism and capitulation, but I do feel like all around me, it is very much, kind of capitulation vibe going on. And I do feel exactly what you're saying, which is if we know anything about cryptos, like when everybody's on one side of the market, that's the perfect time for either institutions to play games, Black Swan to kind of pop up from nowhere, or just one side being so exhausted that you basically have like less liquidity on one side, and so you can kind of plow things back, the other way, where it's like, okay, the sellers are kind of done now, you just have like leverage shorts, and then you can have real buyers, buying into Trump saying that the next, head of the Fed is going to cut rates by a lot, which he actually
Mm.
said. And so you might just have like this weird catalysis where end of the year, going into January, maybe going into Chinese New Year, which I know for a lot of people feels like a long time away, but is not that long. Um, we might just get a surprise basically. Now, whether that surprise is a relief rally or if it's a new leg of an enduring bull run, depending on how you want to look at charts, that's a very different question. But that's it. How are you feeling about it?
Yeah, I think we're at the core on how we feel about it. It seems like a lot of people are at this point almost indifferent, and it looks like. I mean, ultimately, Bitcoin doesn't need a reason to move up or down, right? And it feels like we're at that sort of moment. I mean, we've seen it yesterday with this false breakout, which just got sold massively. So it seems like we're in a very, very small, almost sell the rip phase of Bitcoin. If I look at a couple of other things historically, I mean, but there's still a big catch-up trade to be made between Bitcoin and markets. I think that's still. I'm still putting this out there, and it seems like there's a bit of a dichotomy there, just in terms of how the easing has been reflected. And I think in terms of markets as well, there's a bit of there's a high degree of uncertainty at the moment. Now, historically, I think there's a 70% chance we've made new highs in December. There's a 70% chance that will sort of peak in or that will make another all-time high in the second half of December, which is now, so any minute now. So I suppose it's sort of that. We're now looking. I mean, we've got a couple of events coming out this week. PCE is due tomorrow. CPI today. but it's a lot of uncertainty around the Fed at the moment. It seems like there's a bit of a bidding war between, who sort of promises the most cuts, and yeah, so we're looking at 100 to 125 is the current contender, apparently, according to Kalshi. So we'll take it, and then we'll sort of see. But yeah, it's very, very weird. Altcoins have been sold out quite a bit. I think notably Hyperliquid has underperformed massively, which could be because they're sort of raising their treasury. Could be one reason at least. But yeah, it feels like alts have underperformed massively, and it almost feels like it's a good time to buy, because I'm as indifferent as you guys. I don't think that, and so I think. And obviously, this could be terrible advice, and it isn't. Just to sort of, again, put this out there.
Yeah.
But in terms of psychology, this is an important thing to sort of keep in mind. And it reminds me almost of, I believe it was in 2001, where there was a peak, and then nothing happened, and then it got really, really boring, and then suddenly we've had a really, really rapid and really, really harsh, without any reason as well, rise in Bitcoin. So it reminds me of that phase, but we'll see.
I wonder if that wasn't the 2019, 2020 thing rather than the 2021, 2022 cycle. But we might be talking about two times that were somewhat similar. But for me, like when I think about 2019, 2020, like the pre-COVID thing, it was this kind of apathy, right? Where it's like, it's not moving much. People are feeling a bit bearish. People aren't really looking at markets, and it kind of trickles down, as opposed to like this massive, crash, the 2017, 2018 kind of crash. And so you can share your screen actually, right? So that would be interesting.
Why don't I?
But
do that?
Yeah, the point is we might be surprised, but agreed that it just, the cycle feels different, basically.
Yeah, no, certainly it is. So it was actually, I think, 2020, 2021. It was the rise to 60K, followed by, if we're seeing this now, you should be able to see my screen.
Loading.
Oh, it's loading. Okay. Yeah. So we're looking at sort of.
I don't see it yet though. One sec.
No. Yeah, I don't see it either.
Yeah, but I'll describe it. That's fine.
Okay. I have to add it.
No,
I had to add it to the thing, so there's an extra step. That's all.
Perfect. Right. So essentially, it almost feels like, so in April of 21, there was making a new all-time high. It seemed like things were going really well, and then it just rapidly crashed. And then it feels like we're sort of in this phase at the moment, bottoming out. And here people still think, all right, maybe there's we're going back up. No, we're selling this one off. And then by the time it sort of hits this point, everybody's like, right, this is not interesting. Crypto is going to zero. So I think from that perspective, it reminds me of it. And but look, we'll see. In terms of liquidity, though, what I will say is we're probably looking at a more constructive environment heading into 2026. That's something that we'll see. It's the 18th of December, so the Fed would have turned on QE by now. So that's definitely helpful, and then we'll see. But yeah, feels like people get indifferent about it, which typically is a good time to buy, unless, of course, we are in a bear market, which I don't believe just yet.
That's super interesting. And I think us three should totally debate this, because I feel like when I talk to people right now, there's some people, it almost kind of takes me aback when they almost talk about a bear market like it's, in French we would say like it's, well, no, actually in English, self-evident, right? It's just kind of like, it is what it is. And there's not even like, they don't even expect me to not agree. They're just like, oh, well, since we're in a bear market, valuations for this type of asset, and they kind of go on with their sentence. And I'm like, hey, I mean, in my head, I'm just like, I mean, I'm not gonna argue with clients and partners, but I'm like, I'm not so sure we're in there. I do have this recurring thought that a lot of the institutions that probably sold, the idea of crypto and their ETF and their asset management services and their new feature on their trading platform and so on, ultimately don't want their users to lose money. Now you can take another stance towards this, which is that's not their problem and they don't really care about their end user. They just want to sell stuff. But I do think that for the bigger institutions, they have like almost a reputation to maintain, as in they want the client experience to be positive. And so I struggle to see the BlackRock, the Fidelity, now the Vanguard, the VanEck, and of course the crypto native ones like the Bitwise and others to be like, oh yeah, no, sorry, we were kind of pitching you Bitcoin when it was 80, 90K. It had a nice ramp up until 125K. I hope you guys cashed out because now we're at 88K and actually we're in a full on bear market. Now that doesn't mean they can control markets, but I still feel like even the total market cap of just Bitcoin, let's not talk about crypto, but Bitcoin, relative to a lot of other assets, whether you think of the stock market or commodities and so on, isn't even that big. And so maybe it's my conspiracy theory, that's trying to justify why we're not in a bear market. But I'm just not sensing it. And I keep coming back to that argument, which is we haven't had like a major catalysis to push us down. I think the tariff announcement on the 10th of October by Trump kind of forced an insane amount of liquidation. I think that ripples through the space and over time, for all the people that are invested. But I don't think that it necessarily means that we're done with the bullishness that we should feel in Bitcoin. I'll close with this. The only thing that does make me very depressed is the fact that equities and other assets are performing better. And so Bitcoin is decoupling, but not for the right reason and definitely not in the right direction. Like I would rather see equities go down and Bitcoin pumping. And clearly now it's the opposite that's happening. And I don't know what to make of that, but that's it.
Yeah, it feels like whatever anything else does, Bitcoin just goes down. And so, but again, I feel at this point of the cycle, I know we're talking about, assuredly bear market, bull market, unsure. If you look at how far Bitcoin's gone from the lows already, it put in a solid sort of 5-6x return, which I think back in sort of late 21, 22, if you said 21, oh, you'll still get a 6x on your Bitcoin. I think you would have been very happy, especially if you were buying under 20K. Hitting 100 was quite a solid target all along. And I think as well, we've kind of seen that 100K sort of threshold be this catalyst for a lot of people, and you've seen a lot of old wallets suddenly waking up. So 14-year-old wallets are just coming out of the woodwork, dumping all of their Bitcoin around the 100K mark. And so I think for a lot of people, it feels like maybe Bitcoin's hit this sort of inflection point where there is going to be this bigger rotation, and we've not seen that sort of euphoric blow off top, but maybe it's just a nature of a maturing asset class. And I think probably for the majority of people, myself included, a lot of the pain hasn't even necessarily just come from Bitcoin. It's come from every other single cryptocurrency, the vast majority of which have barely broken past all-time highs or not even close to it this cycle, especially a lot of the bigger names. And unless you caught sort of meme coins in 24, which feels like a lifetime ago at this point, there hasn't been like that many crazy runners. And you had sort of a little bit of action with things like XRP around the sort of like ETF narratives and things like that. But all of those pumps have felt relatively fleeting. And so I feel this is a cycle as a whole has felt very muted, even though on paper you can tick some boxes like, well, it's kind of matched the 4-year cycle. It's done Bitcoin's done a 5x off the bottom, which in my mind kind of makes it not ridiculous to think we're in a bear market, but also it might just play out slightly differently this time. And I know that's the sort of famous last words, this time is different, but maybe with the level of institutional adoption, we don't see such a drastic drawdown. We just chop about a bit, and maybe similar to what Thomas said, maybe it's this sort of local point of consolidation, and going into next year, we've got a much more accommodative sort of liquidity and rates environment, and maybe that will just be the fuel to sort of see a healthy push up into the midterms as well. And I'd be surprised if Trump wants to see the market sort of dwindling this year as he in next year of 26, going into the midterms. And so I don't know, I feel at this point it's probably worth having some exposure. My crypto exposure is still relatively low. I'm probably 25% allocated.
Shame on you. Shame on you.
Yes. I know, awful. And I feel so fucking depressed by it all. I'm basically writing it down to zero mentally at this point. So anything else from here is upside.
I think you said something at the very beginning, which is totally on point, which, I mean, of course, we all know it, is altcoins are really the source of pain, right? So I think the three of us, having been in crypto for the time we've been in, if we were all just holding Bitcoin and we were hodling the hell out of it, I think we wouldn't even feel that bad. I mean, for me, I haven't sold, of course, my Bitcoin, but my point is, if my entire portfolio was Bitcoin and I saw it ramp up from the lower 20K to 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, 110, 120, even if it then drops down to 90K, I still feel...
I'd be so happy.
Yeah, exactly. You still feel like, oh, I played it so smart. Of course, it was going to be a Bitcoin thing, institutionalization, blah, blah, blah. And everything else is the worst, basically, right? And you would feel very vindicated and very smart and also very rich, right? And I think the majority of investors, unfortunately, are probably like us, which is we are diversified crypto holders because Ethereum value prop, Solana value prop, Chainlink, Arbitrum for whatever, Avalanche, Near, Cardano, whatever it is, right? And so pain, basically, and that affects our movement. Before you jump in, last thing I would say, Sotiris, with your comment, about the bear market and writing it off is, again, that's me just shilling some hopium, but I feel like, let's say, all the technical, all the indicators, all the order book flow, everything points to a bear market. And then comes, I don't know, early March, Trump puts, a new head of the Fed, and the guy starts to cut rate aggressively and nobody expects it. I'm like, we're back up, baby, right? And it's just like, of course, you don't want to hope for that or you don't want to plan for that. But I'm just saying there's a lot of things that can happen into the market where it's like you can kind of try to rehash the cycle and the dynamics and the themes of the previous cycles, which we all try to do. And then I'm like, I feel like now, because it's a bit more of a macro asset, there's a lot of things that could change. That's it. I've talked too much. Tom, what do you think?
Final point, sorry, just before Tom jumps in. Even if it's March or October of next year, if we are actually following that 4-year cycle, a bottom will come in at some point. And I think it is still probably worth paying attention to this as an asset class, just because when the markets are good, I think the returns are generally going to still be disproportionate to a lot of other asset classes. So I'm okay to sort of suffer some down years as well.
Yeah.
Back to Thomas.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And probably, if you would sort of pick up this conversation in 10 years' time, I would be surprised if we'll probably say the same thing as if we would have, hodled Bitcoin, we would have been sort of still very happy. And that is going to be true for, probably, the next couple of decades. The general question is on altcoins, as to what and I think Ethereum is really an interesting one because it's seeing more institutional adoption. You can see the Ethereum Foundation heavily also moving into institutional adoption. Now they're racing a little bit with Solana as well on that front, who've just partnered with Visa on settlements. So there's certainly a lot of utility, and I feel looking at what's happening everywhere, looking at a couple of indicators. There's the AZ16 sort of indicator on hiring. And then if you if you look at who is hiring and what sort of jobs are hiring, it just points to an entire economy that's being built on top of blockchain. And obviously that doesn't necessarily correlate with a price impact, but it is certainly getting everybody ready to participate big time. We'll see a lot of structural changes as well. Wealth is being passed down on generations who are, all things equal, more likely to be getting exposure to Bitcoin first and then digital assets. So this is absolutely a mega trend that nobody's stopping, I think, at this point. Even another administration would have a difficult time at this point with all the money that across the board would have been invested into this, would have had a really hard time to stop it, because ultimately lobbyists of both sides will not have it, I don't think. And I think that's really something that is fundamentally happening now. I think even the end of the last bull run, that doesn't necessarily stop a bear market from starting, just because you've got a lot of good catalysts lined up. Ultimately, all comes down to liquidity, but what it will on the liquidity front is actually not looking terrible. Markets always look in terms of narratives that aren't priced in. So that 25 bips cut that we've just sort of seen was old news as it came out. And I think now the focus is going to be on January. We've got 40 plus days left till the next Fed meeting. So that's essentially where the market could potentially change its probability or essentially the pricing of the probability of a cut in January. It looks, by the looks of it now, it looks like markets are betting on there's a 50% chance of a cut in March. Now, if I were to bet, I think that the probability of a cut in January, we will likely see that rise. I think we've seen unemployment data come out pointing towards markets slowly getting into that mode where they're still doing fairly well. Save earnings, that earnings are looking very, very good, but the labor markets are not screaming just yet, but they're slowly starting to signal that they need that sort of liquidity support, and that will eventually come in, and that could be a catalyst. Now, again, Bitcoin doesn't need a catalyst to do anything, and alts don't need a catalyst; they just need Bitcoin to do something. So I think that's the weird thing about, I guess, being in this market in the first place. But yeah, I think it's, if I had to put down the odds, write down odds, I think we're more likely to be consolidating at this time as opposed to, heading into a full-blown bear market. Every single bear market that would have been driven from a macro perspective would have been essentially driven by some sort of event, right? We've seen it with COVID. We've seen the banking crisis before that. So there's always a big catalyst that then ultimately drives the narrative of bear market, investors risking off. If I'm looking at credit spreads, both high yield or investment grade, I'm not necessarily seeing bondholders who are the most risk averse market participants there are. They're not pricing in a big risk at the moment. We're slightly elevated compared to this time last year, but in the greater scheme of things, the pricing of risk is still fairly reasonable. So, and those are all things that generally I'm watching. The biggest risk and the narrative that is created by the movement of markets at the moment is data centers, and it is AI. So I think a lot of people are still very much concerned with the pricing of AI, which is fair because we're starting to use the technology productively, but we've not seen it over a sustainable period of time. I think yesterday I saw a Japanese woman marrying, I'm not sure if it was Grok. It was definitely some sort of bot. She's apparently working in a call center, so that would be a nice twist if, her husband eventually were to kind of replace her. But ultimately, we're in this phase where we've not got enough evidence to say or to price in the productivity gains through AI or what AI will do to labor markets. And yeah, it's been a very, very crowded trade, but my thesis there will be as well, money's going to keep going into that direction. I think the fears are definitely legitimate because data centers are very expensive. We're seeing more leases as opposed to outright data center purchases, which makes sense because not everybody's an expert in building and running data centers. So that's actually plus there's a tax advantage, but I won't bore anyone with this. So yeah, long story short, good earnings. So markets are still very solid. Labor markets are slowly deteriorating, and that should see liquidity requirements rising, and that ultimately will probably push markets and eventually even something that doesn't really move like Ethereum, or even something that only moves down, aka altcoins. They will sort of catch that tailwind.
Can I kind of throw a question to the both of you actually, which is, let's have a moderate view of the market, as in we're not in a full-on bear market, but things could still go lower. Where would it need to go for you to start being buyers, or for you to think this should be the bottom, if a bottom we need to form, basically?
On Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean, let's see,
Probably-
or whatever asset you think, but as in like any asset major, yeah.
I guess history would probably suggest just dollar cost averaging all the way down until things recover. But
Totally, but that's on the strategy side. But I'm just saying,
if-
if you have to put a line in the sand and be like, hey, if it goes down to 69K,
Yeah.
I'm going in, or actually
I think
going
around 75 is probably a good initial point to place some heavier bids. I could see if a possibility where if we really are in a bear market and it bottoms out, it going down to sort of low 40s even. So I think, yeah, it seems impossible to say, I know, go all the way back down to like in the 30s, 39K or something. But I remember
I think it's possible.
last cycle, we didn't think it would go like below 20K, which was the kind of previous low or whatever. And so, or the previous high, sorry. So I think, yeah, if we are to sort of look at that, at that point on Bitcoin, alts though, I think they will probably sell off a lot harder if Bitcoin
even lower,
really starts to shit the bed. I think just their general weakness across the board has already been very telling. And I think as well, the sort of the value proposition of altcoins is wavering a bit now, especially under the new admin that has been very accommodating to crypto projects. And especially for the last sort of like 10 or so years under the SEC, that was very sort of like anti-crypto. Tokens had to be very carefully constructed in a way that they wouldn't actually be offering any sort of rights or returns to the token holders of a threat of it being classed as security. I think that's actually maybe going to play against a lot of altcoins as crypto technology gets more widely adopted. And so I think an example we've seen of that recently was Circle acquiring Axelar, which is the sort of like bridging cross-chain protocol. And they've got their own token, like the AXL token or whatever. Now a lot of the token holders are like, okay, well, what happens to us now? Like Circle's just bought Axelar. What does that mean for the token price? Well, it means kind of nothing for the token price, really, because like Circle can just be like, well, we don't care about a token. Like we have no fiduciary sort of responsibility to hold the token price up. If anything, they've got fiduciary responsibility to divert funds away from Axelar back to Circle to maximize their shareholder profit and value. And so I think that's just like one example now where the sort of legacy constraints of the SEC and the crypto market as a whole might actually be a death knell for a lot of these slightly more promising altcoins, especially in terms of like acquisitions and things like that. But also, I just think in general, a lot of these legacy projects as well don't have good revenue share programs in place. I know a few of them, like Uniswap, are trying to sort of retroactively turn that on, but on the most part, I think a lot of people are kind of a bit jaded now, or are realizing, well, the technology can be good, but it doesn't mean the token price will go up.
Yeah. Totally. I have two things to say about this, and sorry, Thomas, I feel like I'm always interjecting instead of letting you jump in, but there's two things you talked about. First, it was about the price action, like how low it can get, relative to previous cycle. The only fundamental difference, I think, and I think this is something you and I just don't agree with, is I don't feel like the amount of bearishness and depression in this cycle justifies a price move that would go as far down as the post Luna, UST, Celsius, 3AC, Voyager, BlockFi, FTX, Genesis, scramble, basically, right? And I'm like, I remember that time where it was just like pure depression for everybody. Like nobody was even looking at their app anymore. Like nobody
really felt like it could be over. Like everything was
right, yeah,
just right and center, like big exchanges and
cataclysmic, right? And so like when prices go below the previous all-time high, the 20K, so it goes sub 20K, it's like, oh my god, this is such an eventful type of thing. And so all this to say, like, because I'm also thinking about like what would be a relatively interesting level. I'm like, could it go below 69K? 100% it can. Can it go back all the way down to the 40s and 30Ks? Wow. I feel like we need a lot more depression and a lot more negativity to push prices that far down, basically. There's just a quick note. On the
another thing as well, just on that.
Tell me.
Also, the AI trade. So I know Thomas is just touching on that, but if that unwinds and macro shits the bed, then I think no hard bar. No hard bars.
No, that's true. That's true. Actually, that might be the depression and so on. The only thing also is, on your second part of your pitch, about the altcoins is normally I don't like to go with consensus, but I feel like everybody I talk to, when they talk about altcoin, they're like, I think some altcoins are going to do well, but it's going to be very selective, as opposed to like a wave, that raises all boats, type of thing. And I'm afraid to say I think they're correct. So I think the times of easy money, where all three of us were buying IOTA and Walton and Neo and Near and making a lot of money, are just gone, right? Like we didn't know any better, and nobody knew any better, and that's kind of what saved us. And I think now people do know better. And so you see the price performance of some of the launches this year. Of course, the Blast and the Barrett chain, but also even just recently Monad. Maybe it's a timing thing. Or the Plasma, we can talk about your cherished XPL, or but yeah, you're muted. But anyway, it's just like I think it's going to be very selective. That's all. Thomas, any levels that you think in terms of like price? I know it's always hard to put a line in the sand, but like where you think, I'm like, okay, this could be the next bottom. And then maybe to Sotiris's point about the altcoins, like how do you feel about that whole space?
Yeah, so I think my sort of line in the sand will actually be slightly higher. And that's when I'll start sort of adding, but that would just change my views if we were to distinctly break down below 80K. I think that would definitely be a sign. And so that's when I will rethink of my views for sure, because we've already seen what are we looking at? Probably like a 36% drawdown, which is, if we look at sort of previous cycles, that's something that's definitely, that's been in the cards historically as well. If we're dropping below that, then ultimately by definition we're in a bear market, on Bitcoin at least, and for alts it will be definitely a lot lower. So probably much higher, and that doesn't necessarily indicate staying away from Bitcoin or like selling everything, but ultimately it would just mean that it will make sense to give it a bit of a pause, even in terms of DCAing. Give it a few more months and then start DCAing heavier. I think historically that would have been a much better trade. Now, it really will require a catalyst. I mean, if we're looking at the AI trade, right, or speaking of altcoins, just out of interest, so since it's high, how deep of a drawdown did Oracle experience? Just asking that question. What do you guys think? It's been like 15%, 20%, without checking.
Has it been that much? I thought it would be a lot less, basically.
Oh, it's 50 actually. To its
It's
this was
zero.
an
It's
yeah,
half.
to an
Jesus.
intraday high. And so I think that's really an interesting thing, which we'll see in just a second. It's been really quite violent, and I think even if we're looking at Nvidia is probably not quite, but it's Nvidia's a different league. But yeah, I think ultimately it's been pretty violent out there already, and to sort of get from this point to even an exacerbated stage of that, I think a lot would need to happen, and to that we'd need like a proper catalyst, and I don't see that just yet. Not sure what would be for you. What would be a line in the sand, as you put it, for you to say, right? Probably we'll give it a bit of a pause at the moment. Not that it will materialize, of course, but when would you think, right? That's probably let's build instead of hodl for a while. I know you won't be selling.
Oh, sorry. Oops.
Back, I think.
Sorry, man. I don't know why you cut off. I think Sotiris will dial back in. Sorry, I feel like you kept on talking, but you were asking me about my line in the sand for a bottom to form, correct?
Exactly.
I think for me it's the previous all-time high. As dumb as it may sound, but in that curve of the genius and the moron or the retard, I'm like, I feel like we've gone to 125K. All the fundamentals for us to go that high are still there. And so, wait, adding Sotiris. Hey, man.
Hey, sorry about this.
So I'm like, I think all the boxes are still checked, with regards to crypto. I don't see a reason why we would need to go down. If we do need to go down, I feel like it's more either strategic or smart money or repositioning or people playing games. And then if people are playing games, I do think then that the mindset of that price point where bottom should form is what plays basically, right? And so, of course, it can be a little bit lower, a little bit higher. But if you go down to 69K, if you go down to 70K, which for me would still not be the worst thing ever, right? Like if we're being honest, going from 100K to 70K for Bitcoin, essentially a 30% drop from the 100K, of course, a much bigger drop from the 125K, the all-time high. But I'm like, if it's at 70K and a bottom starts forming and I do have cash available and I can keep on averaging in, yeah, probably 70K is the place to do it. The thing that still brings me so much pain though, the altcoins basically. And it's the frustration of this cycle. I was like so set, so intent on just playing the altcoins in which I have no faith, just as a play to outperform Bitcoin, to cycle back into Bitcoin. So I was like, Justin, you kind of mess it up for the past 3 cycles. This cycle, you're going to be super smart. You're going to huddle your altcoins. As soon as they outperform, you're not going to be greedy and you're going to go back into Bitcoin. And of course, as fate would have it, they just never really outperformed, right? And the only one that did kind of...
I don't think that's fate. I think you hit the nail on the head. You don't believe in altcoins, and I think everyone is waking up to that, and so that's the problem.
The only caveat to kind of counter trade my own argument is I do think there are altcoins I do have some faith in, which is like the bigger ones that do provide some kind of DeFi infrastructure. Like if you told me Solana is going to do well in the next few years, 100%. If you tell me Ethereum, against all odds, is going to do well, Yeah, okay, I can see it, right? And some of the other ones that we've discussed previously on the calls. But the point is, even the ones that I kind of care about and see a value prop in, I still wanted to use in this cycle as a way to acquire more Bitcoin. And that just never happened, right? And it's just like, it's so funny how each cycle kind of plays against all the games and all the strategizing you could have done, right? So
It's
anyway,
just
that's my rant.
forever punishing.
Forever punishing. That's, yes, exactly that. So
I think just to add to that though, so if like 2020, April 2020 or May 2021 to September 2021 were indicative, then it could have been that where at some point people think altcoins are dead, and then they'll do another 2x from there. And I still don't think that that's necessarily unreasonable. I think that we do have much better infrastructure at this point, and once the trade does catch on, I think we could still see this
yes,
really violently
yes,
happen. So this is one of those things that I would never write off my bingo card,
yeah,
because I mean, also in terms of the setup, right? So what we're seeing now is very depressed volumes, right?
mm,
On a lot of these altcoins, the tech not getting worse. I think there is certainly a lot of utility in a lot of these things, which we can't really, down talk. So it's not like having exposure to, I don't know, Solana, to some L2s. It's not like there's no upside at all, because they could even outperform Ethereum, right? They could outperform uh, Bitcoin to some extent as well. And so it is, yeah, it's just one thing that I would never cross off my bingo card. And this could also be the time where, you've kind of like, right, you consolidate your losses. It's never going to happen, which is typically when it's starting to materialize and run up. And then by the time you're caught up in your paper book, you'll get back in, and then you'll be clipped. Uh, so I think that's probably, if I had to write a book that would be most probable to materialize, it would be that,
mm,
which would actually be a great like book for children. Teach them early,
yeah,
and I think, yeah, we're in this weird no man's land phase at the moment, and I think a distinctive breakout of 100K is going to change how we feel about it, how everybody else feels about it, and then suddenly, the Oracle trade is no longer interesting, which it isn't. So it's probably at this time sort of even a good time to sort of slowly average back into those. But yes, this is crypto's all about psychology, and you don't need nothing changes sentiment like price, and
mm,
it doesn't change at this point. It doesn't take a lot to move up Bitcoin. We've seen that yesterday. US session,
yeah,
and suddenly it hit 90K, and people went for it because they're like, right, we're back. They leverage into the position. They get, and those are probably the same people that were short like hours before and got liquidated on that side. And so I think there's still, I mean, you can make the case that if something like yesterday happens, there's still a lot of market participation. It were nowhere near on the level of October, or pre-October at least, but there's still a high degree of, for where we're at, like a high degree of market participation. And once that's done, I think funding rates in crypto will be quite indicative. We've already seen that funding rates are negative, which means that shorts are paying longs. And so that's typically the time when it gets really interesting, and when you can see, a nice short squeeze, and nothing turns into a better narrative than a nice short squeeze. And it doesn't take that much to move Bitcoin back to 100K, I don't think. So we'll
Thomas,
see.
I want to ask you about precisely that, which is the flip side of my earlier question, where it's like, where would you draw a line for the bottom? And it's like, how would you guys react if we do get that relief rally, right? And it's like, well, I'm calling it a relief rally. It's probably already kind of tainting or having a bias, on what it actually means. But I'm like, okay, shorts get liquidated, 90K, 95K, 97K, 101K. How are you guys playing it? Are you guys like okay, price is the narrative, we're heading back to the all-time highs, or rate expectation, whatever you got to tell yourself to justify being long, or are you kind of going the other way around, which is, what, I was scared, everyone is was so depressed, now we get that quote unquote relief rally, it's at 101, it's as good as a place as any to take out all my money. Satiris, you don't get a say in this question because we know you're out of crypto, so your opinion is irrelevant. But no, I'm kidding. But my point is, like, is there a point where if you're holding crypto or if you went back long, prices go to 101, for example, is that a place where you would be selling, or you're hodling, or you're switching from one coin to another? How are you thinking about it?
So I think a distinctive breakout over 100K and 101 wouldn't necessarily cut it. I think what I would want to see is probably, like previous local top, like, 100 and 105 to 110. That to me would be, at that point, I'll take my shirt off and I'll wave it, and then we're back in the bull market, I think.
And so you would hodl? Or you would
at that point, I think it would make sense to add exposure, even even if we are already in an extended sort of state. But there's a few nuances as well that I'd be watching. So I would want to see more liquidity going into alt, because a sort of constructive movement in Bitcoin would then sort of trickle through the crypto system, and if it were to go down a route, it would essentially single out sort of just the institutional side, which would be novel because we've only had the ETF since 2024. So if we would see that pan out, then I think it would be a good time to even add exposure. I would also want to see crypto adjacent equities to move up distinctively, and have that sort of priced in, which is sort of a contradiction to what I said in terms of sort of traditional market players. But I think the case can be made that a lot of these equities have had historically a lot of interest, retail as well. If you're looking at Bitcoin miners, if you're looking at the Coinbases, and any sort of new IPOs that we may be seeing as well next year, and that entire market story would, if it were to pan out like that, would be quite a bullish sign, I think, at which point we can easily see another 30-40% heading to 150, 170K on Bitcoin, and that would be I feel a good way to close out the cycle. Of course, at the same time, if I'm looking at diminishing returns, if I'm looking at sort of with a great degree of hindsight, if I'm looking at sort of 126, which is obviously at the moment the all-time high, would that have been like a reasonable top? Absolutely. But at the same time, we've not seen the true violence. At least we've not seen it for a while. The last time we've probably seen it was November of last year. I mean, there's obviously the post trade war dynamics unfolding, right? So April getting into May, but that's more of a catalyst. So I would sort of carve that out. But yeah, the last time we've seen violence to the upside in crypto would have been in November of 2024, and is that right? Yeah, 24. I've lost a sense of time and space since I'm in crypto, I think. So what's a month could have been a year at times. Yeah, and that would be sort of it. Yeah, and it's obviously not what people want to hear. It's not what people say. Oh, if it's that, of course, yeah. If it's that, then I'll be long. But do I need to be long or short now? Like, tell me. That's a difficult question, but I think the odds are definitely forming a tailwind rather than a headwind, in my view.
That's great to hear. Satiris, do you have a view on this?
I'll be hard pressed to probably be allocating more funds at this point if it goes back past 100K. If we break past the previous all-time highs, retest and consolidate above it, then maybe that would sort of change things a little bit. But I'll probably mostly be looking for opportunities to sell, just because I feel like the cycle is already very extended, and I'm always happy to change my mind and readjust. But right now, I just don't see any sort of big catalysts for crypto that I think are really going to sort of turn the sentiment around in a big way, especially without seeing any sort of sustained drawdown washout period that really resets sentiment. So yeah, I generally hate to be this bearish, but I think right now crypto's not offering anything to the world that I find particularly compelling. And so I'm not sure why suddenly that's going to change. And especially when the world has things like AI and robotics on the horizon, then it's a lot to kind of compete against. If we see like a big cooling off of AI though, and maybe LLMs increasingly diminishing sort of performance, and there's no new breakthroughs that are getting us anywhere closer to sort of AGI or anything like that, then maybe people would chase new gains and things like that, which could help with crypto. Maybe if there is one last hurrah with like a new Fed chair and he cuts rates way back and it's just like somehow enables QE again or something like that, and then just like everything pumps, maybe crypto will catch an outsized wave there. But right now I'm just like, I just feel everything has been thrown at crypto in a positive sense. I'm not sure on the sort of like bingo card or checklist of what crypto bros wanted for sort of global adoption, what more there is to tick. Maybe the final thing is like sovereign funds having like a sizable allocation to Bitcoin, for example. But now we're getting widespread adoption, the technology is being implemented, and no one seems interested, or maybe no one seems interested in buying the coins. And maybe we just need to shift what our focus is. Maybe crypto equities will be outperforming in the next cycle. But I struggle to see why someone's going to want to buy the 20th L1 that's been launched. It's like, at this point, what's being brought to the table. A huge caveat though, with that level of negativity is normally a good sign, because it probably means we're near a bottom. So I should be counter trading myself with all of this.
I will echo something that I think you brought up, which is interesting. If, for example, Bitcoin goes to 120K, there's two questions. It's like, first, do you think it's going to go up? That's an interesting question to ask oneself. But even then, it's also about like, how much does it go up relative to other investable assets, right? So like the typical opportunity costs for any kind of trader, which is like, you know, would I rather bet that Bitcoin is going to go from 120K to 200K and not really do, you know, that massive multiple, even though, of course, you know, amazing return for anybody who's more used to traditional assets, versus maybe buying into a robotics or AI, either index or private equity fund or anything else, right, that could potentially go up a lot more. And so there becomes this stuff, right? Because like for me, I'm always a hodler and I'm so passionate about crypto, but at the same time, if you're observing it from a pure investment perspective, it's like it might not be the best investment to add to, right? So yeah, I mean, I thought what you brought up was quite interesting. I don't know if you meant it that way, but that's how I interpreted it.
No, very much so. And I think we're kind of seeing that as well, where you compared the sort of Bitcoin chart against things like SPY or gold, for example, and then you really need to sort of consider what else you could be buying.
I've added your chart. Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. So, for example, Bitcoin Gold topped out in sort of December, January. So it's been relatively underperforming all of this year against gold.
But I'm seeing.
S&P.
Can you just go back on the Bitcoin Gold, because I actually see a bullish RSI divergence. Oh no, it's a stochastic. Wait, Bitcoin Gold. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. No, never mind. Okay, sorry.
I appreciate the sort of Freudian hope there.
No, it's because I don't know if it was on the same scale, but I feel like the slow stochastics are almost like slightly higher rather than lower. But maybe that is my subconscious playing tricks on me. Anyway, Bitcoin SPY.
Less awful, but still not amazing. It sort of topped in July, January of this year. And so again, we're maybe finding some local support against things like this. You never know. But
Well, I mean,
and again, all of this being said, I do think Bitcoin still has a unique purpose. And so out of anything, I think Bitcoin, I am still long-term bullish on. It's just everything else I feel is a lot hard to sell at this point. And I still think Bitcoin will hit $1 million, which is a good 10, 11, 12x from here, which is still a phenomenal trade on a sort of longer time horizon. What is kind of concerning me though is it looks like SPX, like the S&P is kind of starting to roll over a little bit. The NASDAQ as well, you're starting to see this big sort of RSI arch, which is slightly worrying to me, sort of echoing some of what Thomas was saying with things like Oracle. Obviously, they had like this huge pump on the news of the sort of OpenAI deal and things like that. But then seeing a sort of 50% drawdown and something like that is kind of pretty crazy. I think the drawdown in Meta was also quite telling as a sort of canary in the coal mine. I think that was down like 25, 26% from low to high without any real big bearish catalyst. And so I think we are just also seeing maybe a little bit of cooling off across the board, but maybe a good time to buy as well.
Always counter trade Sotiris.
Indeed.
Sotiris' bearishness. Guys, I have a hard stop in, well, essentially 3-4 minutes. I wanted to give a quick shout out to Lighter, which is going to be TGEing presumably later this month. So around Christmas time, or at least before 2026, if the online rumors are to be believed. I'm kind of bullish on that token, just on the basis that it's going to launch at, like 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 billion valuation. And it's actually doing maybe larger volumes and has a more vibrant community than Hyperliquid. That's right now at like, I guess 29 or 30 billion last time I checked. And so I'm like, I do think there's an opportunity for a selective trade here for any kind of capital that's sitting on the sideline and not being utilized. Of course, not financial advice, but that's what I'm going to be doing. I even think there's a case that can be made, depending on how prices perform after TGE, for reallocation of tokens like Hyperliquid or Aster into the next trade, which would then become Lighter if they play their cards right. That's it. I don't know if you guys have any last thoughts for the next 2-3 minutes on maybe a play that is outside of the macro and that you guys are excited about. Thomas, do you have anything, or are you just buying uranium and oil like you always do?
Yeah, and gold. No, I think it's probably at some point it's time to sort of take a nibble into tech, right? Especially the names that have been sold quite a bit. We touched on them. So anything that's sort of chips, I'm still very bullish on. And ultimately, trading against Meta has never worked for anyone, even though it did look like it did for a while, but then Zuck always came back. So definitely in terms of how they manage it, they're not definitely doing a terrible job there. Google's an interesting one with models, I think, generally advancing, but that's also one where models advance and then they kind of lose traction. So, I think that can go either way. And I still think that's probably time looking into anybody's plan to, circle back into Bitcoin as if we are on the way down, and formulate a plan on how much exposure should be added at what levels, and probably for me that would be below 60, 55, and that'll be sort of adding aggressively. But yeah, that's it. That's for me. I'm not sure, Satiris, if you've got a sexy idea.
Maybe gold, silver. Seems like they could.
I heard
do
about
well.
silver, right?
Palladium.
I heard about silver, right? That it's doing relatively well now.
Let me quickly sell my bags.
It's doing fairly well. But
Okay, cool. Precious metals, got it.
Precious metals, yeah.
maybe it's too late already.
Platinum just hit a 17-year high as well. So it looks like the metals are getting a lot of attention. But again, I think at some point the trade's going to be crowded. And that's when it's probably time to sort of circle into things that we feel aren't going to do a lot or are dead, essentially, right? Much like Bitcoin or crypto. Just saying.
No, don't say that. Cool, guys. Let's close it here. I have to hop up, but it was super nice. It kind of revitalized me after landing from my trip. Tom, always a pleasure. Satiris, and I guess we talk to each other in 2 weeks.
Yeah, let's do it. All right,
Well,
take care, guys.
Bye, guys.
Perfect. Get some sleep, both of you.
Indeed.
Bye-bye.